Hi everyone, welcome to JCM Impact Conversations. Today I am thrilled to be here because I'm joined by a brilliant, a wonderful human being. I am joined by Professor Mark Derond. Mark is a professor of organizational ethnography at Cambridge University, and he studies people and situations, and he literally conducts his research with the people. He lives with them in their local context. He spends time with the people that he is exploring the context with, and he is creating long-lasting impact by explaining to us what it means to be a human being. By using the act of empathy, kindness, and human connections, his research and his body of work explain us how people can actually go through difficult situations and how problems can be solved through collaborations and through joint problem solving. But to do this, he is again spending his time with the communities. So he is a real ethnographer and he is a real game changer. I'm so thrilled to be here. His work from Afghanistan and Aleppo to Amazon River and many other countries across the world have been trailblazers. So please join the conversation. So hopefully today's initial discussion will give us inspirations and impactful research pathways to conduct research and create impact beyond publications. So please find Mark's work at the information box below. Hi everyone, welcome to the main stage. And now I am joined by Mark Derond. I'm so happy to be here. I'm really excited. So Mark, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Thank you so much. So at Journal of Supply Chain Management, we are really trying to create and sustain impact beyond publications. And I couldn't think of a better person to talk about like the real impact that we create with our publications and beyond. So Mark, thank you so much for being here and let's delve into this conversation, which will be hopefully really inspirational to so many scholars and some other individuals listening to us. So you always say that best work is the one that must be personal, and it is always important to actually to reveal the truth that the data alone cannot actually display. Can we elaborate on this concept and what do you mean by this?
Yeah, no, thanks, Hakan. Let me try. I'm not the first to have said it. I think it might have been Hoffman and Hoffman who said that our best work tends to be the work that is personal, but it's something that I certainly have come to believe is true. Um, One of my favorite writers is Vivian Gornick. She's quite old now. She's one of the only surviving members of the New Journalists. And she wrote a very short book some years ago now called Situation, the Story. And what she does in the book is to separate out, the situation, the stuff that we as ethnographers write about. It's the context, sometimes the plot, the stuff that's happening from the story. The story, she says, is something else. The story is what the writer, you and I, have come to say. It is what emotionally preoccupies us, right? And so, she says any good piece of literature, and I would say any good ethnography has both of these inside it. The story is usually what we consider to be ethnography, sorry, situation is what we consider to be the ethnography. And the story is kind of often between the lines. It is the reason we do what we do, or why we, what we do. Now, it took her 10 years to write her most famous book, which is called Fierce Attachment. It's a book about her and her mom taking long walks through New York when her mom is very, very old. And her mom is a very difficult person. Okay. And the reason it took her 10 years is because it took her 10 years to find out that effectively she had become her mom. That was her story. And it was only when she had her head around the story that she could write out the situation. And that book is very well known. It's one of the best memoirs written in the last 50 or so years. Anyway, so the point is that as we write ethnographies, I think there's a story behind the situation. The problem is that we don't always know what a story is at the time of writing it. And so it took me many years, I think, for my first ethnographies to find out what my story was. And although I had good reasons to do what I did, the reasons are obvious in the books and the articles. the real reason why I did what I did didn't really become obvious to me until many years later on, right? So I'll give you one small example, which is quite personal, but my very first piece of fieldwork with Cambridge rowers, um, you know, the official reason for doing the research was to find out how an institution that's 180 years old, can survive if the everyday reality of it, the lived experience, is so messy. Stuff goes wrong all the time. And yet, about 10 years later, I came to find out that, in fact, probably the reason why I did what I did, the story behind the situation, is the fact that I never really grew up with a very strong father. And I think I've always wondered what it was like to be a man. Now, what better than surround yourself with these very tall, muscular, kind of sexually very predatory, typical alpha males? Now, that may not be meaningful for you, but it's very meaningful for me. And it helped me kind of rethink why I did what I did in the way I did. And so I think life is often like that, right? And so to answer your question, I think the work that we do, that it might well be our best work, is the work where we are very clear at some point on what the story is behind the situation being the stuff we write, the story being what lives between the lines. So, sorry, it's a
Absolutely.
very long answer.
No, it's a great, it's great. Also, it is quite reflective. I also resonate with this a lot because before the session we were talking about my personal experiences, my garment worker mother that passed away many, many years ago. But I think those are real stories, and the truth makes everything really somehow relatable and more authentic. And also, it is so important to speak about the truth. But oftentimes, as researchers, we don't really understand how to create robust and rigorous research to tell all those important stories. I think your work is really important and teaching all of us how you can be credible, you can be robust, rigorous, and yet human and authentic and also people oriented. Your work, especially one of my favorite papers is the one that you did in the Amazons and that journey.
Oh,
It was really good because you are really talking about the humanity, but also you are talking about situations under pressure with lots of implications, especially in today's context. So I wanted to touch upon it a little bit, how you actually managed to bring all these nuanced, individual, authentic observations to a broader audience where robustness, rigor are measured with really rigid logics. So in a way, I try to understand how we can really deconstruct all those rigid mind mentality problems constructs to rebuild something more human and how you have done this.
well, I think a lot of the thanks goes to the editor, actually. So Tina Bunsell was the editor in charge of our paper. And Tima was very clear that in her first letter to us, she was very clear that she wanted us to maintain our own voice and not for it to be edited out by all the reviews. And so she said, pay attention to the reviews. You must do what reviews tell you to do, that I foreground as being important for you to do. But at the same time, don't let it come at the expense of you putting yourself in the paper, and with all the nuance that you can bring to bear on the paper. I think that the problem with many papers is that they're papers, and though they are 40 pages long, there's still very little we can do because so much of the time is taken up by positioning, doing justice to what other people have said in the field, which is also important, to our method section, to the analysis itself. That a lot of the experience, the really fun stuff, kind of disappears in tables. It's a well-known phenomenon. It's a pity, and I think Tima Bansal was really good as an editor in giving us a freedom that we'd rarely ever had with a paper before, particularly in AMJ, which is a journal which is tends to be quite conservative, right? I think it's loosening up a little bit now. So yeah, so we try, but you need a sympathetic editor who understands what you'd like to do, and then to say, well, I'm not sure if it's going to work, but I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. And she did. So thanks to her. Yeah.
Well, exactly thanks to her. Now we have fantastic research publications from you and from your co-authors. So we invite all the editors to use the act of empathy and to let researchers to tell their truth and their stories because actually What I'm learning from you is this is the first time we're meeting, but it feels like I have already met you years ago, and I was always in this conversation. But to me, what is really important, you are using storytelling as a tool to not just share findings, but to actually reawaken empathy and humanity within these ecosystems where you are doing your research. So actually, it's really important to see also storytelling as a tool to create societal impact
Mhm.
and
Well,
help
I
people.
mean, Hakan, you're very nice, so thank you for saying these things. But I think you're right in terms of empathy. I mean, without empathy, we are lost to each other. Empathy is something we rely upon deeply in everyday life. We somehow pretend that it has no place in scientific discourse, but that's mad. I mean, particularly in ethnography, whereby the only means for navigating the social world is through empathy, is the ability, maybe imperfectly, to put ourselves into someone else's shoes and try and understand what the world looks like from their point of view, which of course lies at the heart of ethnography. And so, yeah, without empathy, we would make no progress, you know. And it doesn't mean that it's perfect, it's not. But I think by and large, we've evolved to become reasonably good at orienting ourselves socially, navigating these very complex social worlds. Um, and it's interesting you should say this. I mean, talk about empathy now in today's world, whereby, as you know, empathy comes to be seen as a weakness. I mean, it's actually, empathy. It's not really empathy they're talking about, it's sympathy, I think, more than empathy. But I mean, it's kind of mad how the world seems to be reversing decades or centuries of human development
Absolutely.
for
And
something the prospect of which isn't at all
absolutely. And
real.
also I'm so conscious of the fact that so many researchers now, because of some political pressure that they
Mm.
are facing, are not even allowed to say certain things. So
Yeah.
especially in today's context, we also need to use our privileged positions to speak power to truth and to bring all those stories. But here, also, Mark, one of the things that I wanted to bring to your attention, I spend so much time with communities. Also, it is my personal joy to speak with the people, not just because they are my research subjects, but they are my friends. But oftentimes I'm hearing this and they tell me when researchers, especially from the global north, and I don't like this distinction global north, global south, but just to give you an idea, especially the researchers from the global north, or let's say more powerful countries, when they go down to the field, there's already a power imbalance. So the researcher and then the research subjects. But then I am learning from my friends in the field that mostly farmers, garment workers, etc. Actually, researchers unconsciously might create more harm than good. Because especially when we go to the field to do research, we expect people to follow our own schedules, or we expect them to understand what we want them to talk about, etc. So actually, it is not an inclusive language. It is quite dominant and quite, in a way, arrogant. So we impose our constructs, we impose our questions. So with this impact conversation series, one of the things that I also want to do is to invite people to the act of empathy to say that actually researchers also have this moral responsibility and cultural duty to empower people to bring them something rather than take knowledge out of them. And then at the end, we create more harm than good, especially when we talk about sensitive subjects and quite difficult concepts. So then we open up wounds and then we vanish. So I don't want, especially the young generation of researchers, to follow similar patterns. So I just invite everyone to the act of empathy, at least to the best of my voice.
I'm glad you do. It's very hard, I think, to do ethnography and not hurt people to some extent. And what I mean by it is that it's very difficult to write ethnographies candidly, whatever that means from your own point of view, and not inadvertently disappoint people that you might have spent time with who have a different view of the world than you do, or who told you things that they at the time thought would remain private but are now public. And, they never told you they were private, so you didn't consider them private. And there are many examples of that in ethnography. So I think one of the hardest things I find in writing up our work, being as true as we can to our own observations and our inferences about the other's world, is that we will disappoint some of the people, and it means that we hurt some of the people we're with. But that's quite different, I think, from re-traumatizing people, where you deal with with communities that have had terrible experiences, and you're kind of forcing people to talk about things that are actually, yeah, that are very difficult for them to talk about. Um, yeah. Um, and I think we need to be careful as ethnographers, however appealing it might be, not to become ambulance chasers, right? Where we simply latch onto the next big trauma, in the hope that it will give us a sexy context to publish from, and not considering the effect that our presence might have on these people. I'm not saying I do it perfectly, but I'm aware of it. Yeah.
Absolutely no. It's a great point not to create traumas or again to just regenerate decolonization in so many settings and research. And Mark, I am so conscious of time, but before you go, I want to ask one more question because in your research you have been in multiple places under pressure and in difficult situations from Afghanistan to Aleppo to Amazons. So do you have a one life-changing moment in your research that actually changed your perspective on so many things? Or I'm just curious to hear from you if you ever came across something that changed you as a researcher, as a human being. So I just wanted to learn from your fantastic experiences if something fantastic or unexpected happens and then you change your life perspective.
So thinking on my feet, let me just give you two responses. I'm sure that my best response will come after our conversation.
Okay.
Right? It's always how it happens. The first response is that I think any ethnography should leave us changed. And any ethnography, anything I've done has left me changed for better or worse. And it's because you're a human being, and that exposure to whatever it might be, I think should make a difference to the way you look at the world. Um, I think secondly, if anything, I think ethnography leaves me with the realization of how little I know. So no matter how rich your descriptions are, no matter how hard we work, there's still so much we don't know and will never know. And even having been as close to the subject as ethnographers do tend to get, I think that, it may not be a wonderful epiphany, but I think it's just this lingering, nagging doubt at the back of your mind, is this good enough? Have I done justice to what it is that I saw? Have I been able to give the reader some sense of what it's like to be the other? And I'm not sure what the answer to that is. I know that I work hard to do it, as I'm sure you do in many ethnographers. But the realization that life is so much more complex, that in the papers that we write, so much of the complexity is cut out and left on the cutting room floor because there's no there's no scope in the paper for all the exceptions to the rules, where the emphasis is on developing a theory that is somehow elegant and yet a distortion, I think, of everyday life. I think living with that frustration and that lingering doubt, I think, is one of my own observations about ethnography. But I'm not sure how to solve that, right? We are only in other people's worlds temporarily and only ever kind of as an outsiders.
But I think also it is a great awareness, and we are being aware, and also we are being aware of the fact that human connection is really important. Also, we are all vulnerable and fragile. So I also learned from your work, it is also important to be fragile and vulnerable, and there's no need to deny it. We just a human. We are human beings, and as long as we are creating a conversation where we empower people and when we literally give agency to one another. And this is the beauty and this is the, to me, impact beyond publications. So Mark, thank you so much for your time. And would you like to say anything, any final takeaways or any wish for, or any messages to the individuals that listen to us? So what would you say as a final remark?
Um, if you're doing ethnography, just keep at it, be true to yourself and be thoughtful. I mean, there are two prescripts for ethnography, according to Tim Ingold, which I really like. So he says ethnography relies on empathy, number one, and it relies on doubt, number two. And empathy, we know what it means. He says doubt means the ability to consider that there's more than one way to live a meaningful life, you know. And I mean, you can't go far wrong, I think, when you hold on to those. So that's probably what I'd like to leave your listeners with. Anyway, thank you, Hakan. You've been great and very kind. So
Thank you so much, Mark, and I will see you around. And thank you, everyone listening and joining us today's conversation. So hopefully, what we discussed will give you inspirations, and this is just the beginning. So let's work together. Let's create knowledge, but also let's transform the certain boundaries to create impact for everyone. So I will see you all at the next episode. And Mark, thank you so much for being here, and see you later. Bye, everyone.
closely. Thank you. Bye. Bye. Bye, everyone.